The alien scout ship came out of faster-than-light travel and stopped. It was supposed to be a quiet part of space. There was nothing here on the star naps. No stations, no colonies, no reason for anyone to be passing through this stretch of empty dark between two solar systems. But there was a ship. Two ships, actually. One was dead, the other should have been. Ambassador Vreth stood at the observation window and looked out at the wreckage floating in front of him. He had been a diplomat for 31 years. He had seen battle zones. He had visited the aftermath of wars. He thought he had a good sense of what destruction looked like. This was something different. The large ship, the dead one, was a Drath pirate cruiser. Vreth recognized the design immediately. Every species in the known galaxy recognized that design. The Drath were feared across 40 star systems. Their cruisers were built for one purpose: to take what they wanted and leave nothing behind that could follow them. This one was dark. Its engines were gone. Its hull was split open along the left side, torn apart like a piece of fruit crushed in a fist. It was floating in a slow spin, leaking atmosphere and frozen fuel into the void. The small ship next to it was a human cargo freighter. Dr. An, the xenobiologist on Vreth's team, was already running scans. She was quiet for a moment, reading the numbers on her screen. Then she said, in a voice that was very carefully calm, "That freighter has lost 40% of its atmosphere. Its hull integrity is below safe flight levels. 3 of its crew members are showing life signs that by our medical standards mean they are critically hurt." Commander Seal, the military observer, leaned forward. "And the Drath cruiser?" "No life signs," Dr. An said. "No active systems. It is completely dead." There was a long pause on the bridge. Seal looked at the freighter again. The kind used for hauling ore between mining colonies. It had no weapons on record. It had no military markings. It was the sort of vessel that, if it saw a Drath cruiser, should have turned around and run. Should have sent a distress signal and hoped someone heard it before the Drath finished their work. Instead, the Drath cruiser was dead. Vreth opened the comm channel. The signal was cracked and full of static, but it connected. The man who answered looked about mid-40s. He had a wide, tired face, dark circles under his eyes, and grease on his hands. Behind him, Vreth could see a cockpit covered in warning lights. A woman with short red hair was on her back under a console, working on something. Another crew member was visible in the background, moving slowly, one arm held stiff against his body. The man looked at Vreth and the alien faces on his screen. He did not look afraid. He looked like someone who had been awake for a very long time and had a long list of things that still needed doing. "Hey," he said. "You need a jump cable, or are you just passing through?" Vreth blinked. He had prepared 17 different opening statements for first contact with a human vessel. None of them had prepared him for this. "We are observing," Vreth said carefully. "We saw your ship. We wanted to know if you needed help." The man nodded slowly. "We could use a medic if you have one, and some hull sealant if you can spare it. Our patch job is holding, but I would not bet everything on it." He paused. "Well, more than I already am." He said his name was Dale Kowalski. He ran a 6-person crew on a cargo run between 2 outer mining colonies. The woman under the console was his sister, Nora. She was his engineer. The man with the stiff arm in the background was Ray Carver, who handled loading and equipment. Ray had been the first one hurt when the Drath boarded. Off-screen, quietly told Vreth that by their medical standards, the injury she was reading on Ray Carver should have left him on the floor, unable to move. The scan showed a metal strut that had gone through his shoulder. He was running system checks on the ship with his other hand. Vreth asked Dale what had happened. Dale explained it plainly, the way someone explains something that made obvious sense to them at the time. The Drath cruiser had appeared out of nowhere, the way Drath ships do. They had blocked the freighter's path and opened a channel. They wanted the cargo. They wanted the ship. And they shot Ray first, before anyone said a word, just to show that they were serious. Dale had told his crew to strap in. The freighter carried a mining drill on its forward deck, a big one, industrial grade, built for cracking open asteroid rock. Dale had used it before on a stubborn ore vein that had cost him 3 weeks and most of his patience. He had driven the freighter straight at the draft cruiser at half speed. He had aimed for the engine port. The drill went in first. Seal, who had said nothing for several minutes, finally spoke. "You rammed a draft cruiser." "They shot Ray," Dale said. He said it the way someone states a plain fact, like it explained everything, because to Dale, it did. "Your ship is barely holding together," Seal said. "Yeah," Dale agreed, "but theirs stopped moving, so—" He shrugged with one shoulder. Vreth looked at his crew. Dr. On had stopped writing her notes. Commander Seal had the face of someone doing math in his head that kept coming out wrong. Dale asked if they wanted to come aboard while they waited for the hull sealant to dry. He said Nora had made food. He said it was not very good because Nora was a better engineer than a cook, but they were welcome to it. Vreth said yes. He was not fully sure why. It felt like the right answer. They ate at a small table in the crew room of a ship that was still leaking air in 3 places. Nora explained the patch job while she ate, pointing to places on the hull diagram on the wall, describing what she had done and what still needed doing. Ray Carver sat at the far end of the table. Somebody had wrapped his shoulder with bandaging material. He was eating with his good arm and making notes on a tablet with the same hand, switching between the two without comment. Nobody at the table seemed to find this unusual. Vreth watched them and said very little. He was listening, but not to the words. He was listening to the feeling in the room. There was no panic. There was no trauma shaking through the air the way it did after most violent events he had witnessed. There was just tiredness and work and the simple focus of people who had a problem and were still fixing it. Later that night, when they had returned to their own ship, and Dale's freighter was back on its way, patched and limping, but moving, Vreth sat at his desk and wrote the first line of what would become the most studied report in Salhari diplomatic history. He wrote, "We have made contact with a human crew. I am adjusting my expectations. The legends may have been conservative in their estimates." He sat back and thought about Ray Carver, running system checks with a metal strut in his shoulder. He thought about Dale Kowalski saying, "They shot Ray," like it was the only reason a person would ever need. He had studied humanity for years before this mission. He had read every account, every battle record, every story passed down through galactic history about the strange, stubborn creatures on the 3rd planet of the yellow sun. He had thought he understood what those stories meant. Sitting in the quiet of his ship, with the dead draft cruiser still visible on the rear camera, he was beginning to think he had not understood them at all. The orbital station above Earth was not what Ambassador Vreth had expected. He had visited many space stations in his career. Most of them had a quiet, ordered feeling. Proper lighting. Staff who moved with purpose and spoke in measured tones. Stations run by species who understood that space was dangerous, and who built their habits around that understanding. This one smelled like food. At least 6 different kinds of food, from at least 6 different places, all being cooked somewhere nearby at the same time. A group of small humans were running down a side corridor. Not walking quickly, running, for no clear reason. 2 of them were laughing. One of them tripped, got up, and kept running. A woman appeared at the docking gate holding a clipboard and a cup of something hot. She had dark skin, short hair, and the easy expression of someone who had done this job 1,000 times. She looked at Vreth, then at Commander Seal, then at Dr. On, without any particular surprise. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Patrice Webb, Docking Administration. Do any of you have anything to declare?" Vreth looked at Seal. Seal looked at Vreth. "We carry standard diplomatic materials," Vreth said. Patrice made a note on her clipboard. "Great. Follow the blue line to reception. Someone will meet you there." She pointed at a line painted on the floor, then walked away, already reading something else on her board. Dr. On watched her go. "They are not afraid of us," she said quietly. "No," Vreth agreed. He was not sure yet if that was a good thing or not. The woman waiting for them at the reception area was named Sandra Okafor. She was not tall. She was not young. She wore a plain, dark jacket and carried nothing in her hands. She smiled when she saw them, a real smile, not a formal one, and shook Vreth's hand the way humans do, which she had read about but had not quite expected. She was Earth's lead contact diplomat, the person whose job it was to make this meeting go well. Dr. On had done her research before the mission. Sandra Okafor had spent 20 years working in human conflict zones, places where different groups of humans had been fighting each other and would not stop. She had once talked a warlord into releasing 200 people he had been holding prisoner. Not by threatening him, not by offering him money, by sitting across from him for 3 days and finding the story he wanted to tell about himself and making that story easier to reach than the one he was living. The warlord had let the prisoners go. He had also shaken her hand at the end. Dr. On had read that detail several times and still was not entirely sure what to do with it. The first day of talks went well. Sandra was patient, warm, and very precise. She asked questions that showed she had studied the Salhari carefully. She made no mistakes of manners. She made small jokes that landed correctly. Vreth found himself relaxing in a way he had not expected to on this mission. The crisis came on the second day. It started as a signal, then a second signal. Then the communications officer on the station came into the meeting room and said something quietly to Sandra, who listened without expression, nodded once, and stood up. "Please excuse me for a moment," she said. She walked to the comm station at the side of the room and opened a channel. On the screen a face appeared that made every member of the Salhari delegation go still. The Drath Arc voice was one of the most feared speakers in the known galaxy. The title was not just a name. The Arc voice spoke for the entire Drath fleet. When the Arc voice made a demand, it was not a negotiation, it was a statement of what was going to happen. The Arc voice was large, armored, and furious. A human cargo crew had destroyed one of its pirate vessels. The Drath did not care that the crew had been attacked first. The Drath did not think in those terms. What they cared about was that a small, unarmed human freight ship had killed a Drath cruiser, and the story of it was already spreading across 30 star systems, and it was a story that made the Drath look weak. The demand was simple. Earth would submit a formal apology. Earth would pay a very large sum in resources. Earth would accept a Drath military presence in their outer colonies as a sign of respect. If Earth refused, the fleet would make clear to the rest of the galaxy what happened to species that did not show the proper amount of fear. The Salhari delegation expected panic. They expected delay. They expected Sandra to turn to them for support, or to ask for time, or to do any of the many things that a diplomat does when a very large and angry force points itself at their planet. Sandra listened to the whole message. She waited until it was done. Then she leaned forward slightly and looked at the arch voice on the screen. "I hear you," she said. Her voice was pleasant. "I want to make sure we understand each other, so let me be honest with you." She then reminded the arch voice, in a calm and friendly tone, that humanity had been fighting wars among itself for 10,000 years. That it had never once, despite its best efforts, managed to destroy itself. That every time something very large and dangerous had tried to remove humans from the picture, the humans had found a way to still be there afterward, usually in larger numbers and with more information than before. She said she was not making a threat. She was offering context. She said she genuinely did not know how a conflict between Earth and the Drath fleet would end. She said she suspected the arch voice did not know either, and she said that uncertainty was expensive for everyone. Then she offered a different path. The pirate crew that attacked the human freighter had acted without Drath authorization. This was a fact. Sandra had confirmed it in her research before the meeting. Rogue operators, working outside official Drath channels, had attacked a civilian vessel and been stopped by that vessel's crew. Earth could formally acknowledge the distinction between the rogue crew and the official Drath fleet. The Arch-Voice could stand before the rest of the galaxy as the force that did not sanction piracy against civilians. That was a better story. That was a story that made the Drath look disciplined, not weak. She said all of this without raising her voice. She said it the way you explain something to someone you respect. There was a long silence on the channel. The Arch-Voice said it would consider her words. The channel closed. 2 hours later, the Drath fleet pulled back from the outer colony zone. No statement was issued. No formal response came. They simply left. Commander Seal sat very still for a while after that. Then he said to Dr. On, "She had no fleet, no backup, no leverage. The Drath could have taken everything she offered and still moved on the colonies." Dr. On thought about it. She had one thing, she said. She was completely sure her species would survive the alternative. You cannot threaten something that is not afraid of the threat. Seal was quiet for a moment. That should not work as a strategy. No, Dr. On agreed. It should not. That evening, Vreth sat with Sandra in the small station dining area. He asked her, simply and directly, if she had been scared during the exchange with the Arch-Voice. Sandra thought about the question seriously, the way she thought about everything. Then she said, "Yes, but being scared and being stopped are two different things. I have never found a good reason to let one become the other." She poured him a cup of something warm and pushed it across the table. Vreth held it in his hands and thought about the Arch-Voice, one of the most feared beings in the known galaxy, choosing a better story over a fight. He thought about the woman across from him, who had offered that story with nothing behind her but a species that refused to calculate how things ended. He added 3 pages to his report that night. 3 months after the first talks, Sandra Okafor arranged a tour of Earth. Not of the government buildings, or the technology centers, or the military installations. Those could come later. She took the Salhari delegation to see the places that told a different kind of story. She took them to a war memorial. It was in a large city that had been almost completely destroyed 80 years ago in the biggest war Earth had ever fought. The city had been rebuilt after the war. The new buildings were tall and full of light. But the memorial was old, or built to look old, and it stretched for a long distance through a quiet park near the center of the city. Long black walls, low to the ground, covered in names. Millions of names. Dr. On walked slowly along the wall. She had her scanner running, but she was not looking at her screen. She was looking at the names. There were so many of them that they became hard to see after a while. They stopped being names and became something else. A number too large to hold in the mind at once. Commander Seal walked beside her and said nothing. He was a military observer. He had studied human conflict carefully. He knew the numbers behind this war in the way that a researcher knows numbers. Seeing the names was different from knowing the numbers. He was not entirely sure why, but it was. Vreth was standing a short distance away when he noticed the 2 humans near the end of one of the long panels. One was an old man. He was very old, Vreth thought, in the way that some humans got when they had lived a long and difficult life, and the bodies started to carry it visibly. He moved slowly and leaned on a wooden stick. But he stood straight in front of the wall, and the way he held himself was not the posture of someone who was sad or tired. He was present, fully present the way a person is when something matters to them very much. The other was a boy, young, 12 years old perhaps. He stood next to the old man and looked up at the wall with serious eyes. Vreth had a translation device in his ear. He did not move closer, but the park was quiet, and the 2 of them were not far away, and he could hear them. The boy looked at the names for a while, then he said, "Grandpa, why do we keep fighting each other if we always end up building one of these afterward?" The old man was quiet for a moment. His name, Vreth would later learn, was Calvin Marsh. He was 83 years old. He had served in a later conflict than the one this wall remembered. He had been young then, and the war had been long, and he had lost people he cared about. He had carried that for 60 years and found a way to keep going, the way humans do. His grandson was named Owen. Owen had been named after a great-great-uncle, whose name was on this wall, somewhere in the middle of the long panel in front of them. They had come to find it. Calvin looked at the wall for a moment before he answered. "Because we are not very good at being afraid," he said. "When something threatens us, something old inside us just does not add up the numbers the way it should. It does not say, 'This is too big, stop.' It says, 'Not yet, keep going.'" Owen thought about that. "Is that good or bad?" "Both," Calvin said. "Mostly it has been both at the same time. We have done terrible things because of it, and we have survived terrible things because of it." He pointed at the wall. "This is not here to celebrate the war. This is here so we remember what it cost, so the people who come after us carry the weight of it, so they choose more carefully." Owen looked at the names again. "Does it work?" Calvin was quiet for a beat. Then, "Sometimes. We are still here, so it works enough." They found the name a few minutes later. Calvin put his hand on it. He did not say anything. Owen stood beside him and did not say anything either. They stayed there for a while, just the two of them and the name cut into the stone. Dr. On had come to stand near Vreth while the exchange was happening. She had heard it too. She was very still, which was unusual for her. She was normally taking notes or reading data on their screen. She was doing neither. After Calvin and Owen had gone, she sat on a bench nearby and opened her notebook. Vreth sat next to her and waited. She wrote for a long time. The report she filed that evening would become the most widely read document in the Salhari Science Corps within 2 weeks of its release. Researchers from 12 other species would request copies within a month. The part of it that was quoted most often was this: "Humans mourn together and then continue. They have developed a way of living with catastrophe that no other species has properly documented. They do not deal with grief by avoiding it. They carve it into stone. They bring their children to stand in front of it. They explain it out loud, in simple words, on quiet afternoons. And then they go home and make dinner and wake up the next morning. This is not weakness. This is a form of strength that does not look like strength until you understand what it is doing. They are not pretending the hard things did not happen. They are digesting them. They are turning them into something that can be carried forward, instead of something that has to be set down." The old man told the boy, "We are still here." 3 words, but those 3 words contain 10,000 years of what it took to still be here. Every catastrophe survived, every terrible cost paid, every generation that looked at the damage and built anyway. Commander Seal read the report that night. He sat with it for a long time. Then he wrote a single line in the margin next to Dr. On's last paragraph. It said, "This is why they do not stay dead." The next morning, Vreth asked Sandra about the memorial. He asked her what it meant, not historically, but personally. What did it mean to her to have that wall in the middle of her city? Sandra thought about it with the same careful seriousness she brought to everything. "It means we are honest," she said. "A lot of species, I think, want to remember the best versions of themselves. The victories, the great moments. We have those too, but we also build these." She nodded in the direction of the park. "Because if you only remember the good parts, you start to think the bad parts cannot happen again. And they can. They always can. A wall is there to make sure we do not forget that." Vreth thought about the boy Owen asking if it worked. He thought about Calvin saying, "Sometimes." He thought about the name on the wall, an old man's hand resting on the stone, a boy standing quietly beside him. He had come to Earth expecting to find the monsters from the stories, the creatures that bled and kept fighting, that refused to stop, that broke things twice their size, and did not seem to understand when they were supposed to be done. He had found that. He was finding it everywhere he looked. But he was also finding this, a species that put its grief in stone so it would not disappear, that stood in front of the worst things it had ever done and said, "We remember," that handed the weight of history to a 12-year-old boy in a quiet park on an ordinary afternoon, so he would carry it forward and choose more carefully. The monster and the memorial were the same creature. That was the part the stories had never told him. The alert came in the middle of the night, station time. Vreth was asleep when his communications officer knocked on his door. He was awake before the second knock. He had been a diplomat long enough to know that a knock in the middle of the night was never good news. A star at the edge of human-settled space was entering an early ignition event, the kind of event that civilizations built entire early warning systems to detect, because the warning was supposed to come years in advance. This one had not. The readings were wrong. The models had missed something. The event was happening now, moving faster than it should, and 3 human colonies sat in the zone where the radiation and the shockwave would reach. The Salhari science team ran the numbers quickly. Ambassador Vreth stood at the back of the room and watched them work. When they were done, Dr. On looked up from her screen and said, "With current assets in the region, and given the window available, we estimate 30 to 40% of the colonists can be evacuated in time." Vreth looked at the number. 30 to 40%. That meant 60 to 70% of the people on those 3 colonies were going to die. "What is Earth doing?" he asked. His officer checked the open channels. "They received the alert 4 minutes ago," she said. They are already moving." Vreth went to the observation deck and looked at the screens. He watched what happened next for a long time, without speaking. The person running the evacuation from Earth's side was a woman named Donna Rains. She was the fleet coordinator for the outer colonial region. Her command hub was inside the danger zone. She had not moved it. She had opened every channel available and started giving orders in a voice that was completely steady. The kind of steady that is not calm by nature, but is made calm on purpose, because people are listening and they need to hear it. Her second in command was a young officer named Pete Alvarez. He was 26 years old. He had trained for large-scale emergencies, but had never run one. Donna gave him the docking coordination job, without any explanation of why she trusted him with it. She just handed it to him and moved on to the next problem. What happened in the next 2 hours was something that Vreth would describe differently every time he tried to explain it afterward, because he was never sure he had the right words for it. The ships came. Not military ships, not a prepared rescue fleet. Civilian ships, cargo ships, personal vessels, ore haulers, and passenger shuttles, and small private craft that had no business being anywhere near a stellar event. They came from every direction. Nobody had called all of them. There was no command that went out to all of them. They saw the alert, or they heard it from someone who had, and they turned their ships around and came. Pete Alvarez had a docking coordination system designed to handle 40 vessels. He now had 300. Vreth's officer relayed the comm traffic because she did not know what else to do. The bridge of the Salhari ship went very quiet as everyone listened to the open channel. They heard Pete Alvarez's voice, tight and focused, assigning berths and vectors and talking to 3 people at once, switching between problems without pausing, finding solutions to things that did not have solutions by refusing to accept that they did not have solutions. They heard him say, at one point, to a captain whose ship was too large for any available bay, "I do not care if you do not fit the bay. Strap them to the outside if you have to. We are not leaving anyone." Dr. On wrote that line down. She kept it. The pilot who drew the most attention was a man named Greg Stubbs. He was 61 years old. He was retired. He had been heading to a fishing location on one of the outer moons when the alert came through. He had turned his ship around without telling anyone he was doing it, because it had not occurred to him that it needed announcing. His ship was rated for 2 passengers and basic cargo. He made 1 run into the zone and came out with 14 people. Then he went back. He made 4 runs in total. On the 4th run, His ship took radiation damage that should have ended it. His navigation system went down. His shield rating dropped to a level that should have triggered an automatic abort and turned the ship around. Greg Stubbs turned the auto abort off manually and went in anyway. He came out with 11 more people. His ship was not in good shape when he cleared the zone. He handed the controls to a 19-year-old colonist who told him she had 2 hours of simulator training. Greg told her that was probably enough, and then he passed out from the radiation exposure. The girl flew the ship to the nearest station. She landed it on the second try. Greg Stubbs spent a week in medical recovery and told anyone who asked that the girl had done all the hard work. When the window closed and the numbers came in, Donna Raines read them once. Then she read them again. 96% of the colonists had been evacuated. The Salhari delegation had projected 30 to 40. Vreth stood in the briefing room and looked at the number for a long time. He thought about the math. He thought about the models his team had run, carefully, with all the correct information available. 30 to 40% was not a bad estimate. It was a reasonable estimate given the assets in the region and the time available. It had simply not accounted for 300 ships showing up because nobody told them not to. It had not accounted for a 26-year-old coordinator deciding that a system built for 40 vessels could handle 300 if you stopped caring about what it was built for. It had not accounted for a 61-year-old retired pilot making a fourth run in a ship that should not have made a second. Commander Seal had not spoken for a long time. When he finally did, he said, "They improved the odds by refusing to accept them." Vreth nodded slowly. That was exactly right. That was the only thing that had happened here. The odds were real. The math was correct. Humans had simply looked at the number and decided it was a starting point rather than an answer. Dr. Ahn filed her report. It was shorter than usual. There were not many words that made it larger than it already was. She wrote, "Human courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear be the last word. But what we witness today is something beyond individual courage. It is contagious. One person turns their ship around, and then another. One coordinator decides the system can handle more than it was built for. And then it does. The behavior spreads through a population the way fire spreads through dry grass. It does not need a commander. It needs one person to go first." She added a single line at the end of her report that she almost deleted before sending. It said, "I think I understand now why the old stories say that fighting humans is like fighting a fire. You can put out the flame in front of you, but while you're doing that, 3 more have started somewhere behind you." The report went out. She did not delete the last line. 1 year after the first contact, Ambassador Vreth sat at a small table in a restaurant in a city on Earth and thought about what he was going to write. The Galactic Council had been waiting a long time for his final report. Every species with a seat on the council had been waiting. The report had been delayed twice. Vreth was known for careful, measured work, and the council trusted his process. But there had been quiet questions, whispered concerns. Some council members had begun to wonder if humanity had done something to compromise the ambassador, if perhaps the diplomatic mission had gone wrong in some way that had not been reported. Vreth was aware of the whispers. He had let them wait, because he was not ready. He had needed to understand what he had seen before he could write about it. He thought he understood it now. The restaurant was too small. The table was crowded with plates of food that nobody had fully planned for, because when the 4 of them sat down, they kept ordering things to share, and it got out of hand. The room was loud. 2 tables over, a group of humans were celebrating something and laughing in a way that filled the whole room. Across from Vreth was Sandra Okafor, who had ordered 3 things she did not really need and was eating all of them anyway. Beside her was Dr. Ahn, who had submitted a formal request for a permanent research posting on Earth 6 weeks ago, and was visibly happy in a way she had not been before the mission. And next to Vreth, taking up more space than the chair was designed for, and currently talking with his mouth full, was Dale Kowalski. Dale had been given the unofficial title of Ambassador at Large, mostly because every time someone tried to give him a formal title with proper duties attached to it, he ignored the duties and did whatever he thought needed doing instead. He had turned out to be surprisingly useful in that way. He had a talent for walking into rooms where very important people were being very careful and saying the thing that everyone was avoiding saying, and doing it in a tone that made it impossible to be offended. Vreth had come to this dinner with one question. He had been carrying it for weeks. He waited until the food was mostly eaten and the table was quieter, and then he asked it. "Are the old stories true?" he said. "The ones about humans, the ones we tell our children to warn them, are they true?" Sandra put down her fork. She took the question seriously, the way she took everything seriously. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes and no," she said. "The things in the stories are real. We bleed and keep going. We fight things that are bigger than us. We do not always stop when we should. All of that is true." She paused. "But the stories describe what we are like when we are pushed, when something is threatening us or people we care about. That is when the monster part shows up. The stories never described what we are like when we are not being pushed." "What are you like then?" Vreth asked. Sandra looked at the table, the leftover food, the noise from the nearby celebration. Dr. On, who had found something she loved and come back to it. Dale, who had rammed a Drath cruiser and then invited aliens aboard to eat a meal that was not very good. "This," she said simply. Dale, who had been listening, said, "We also make pretty good soup." He looked at Vreth. "You should try the soup before you go. The stuff in that first meal Nora made was not representative. She is a bad cook. The soup here is better."